Hello friends and welcome. Today we've got a tier list of the best hard supports in my opinion. Of course, we can move some heroes up and down a little bit, but I pretty much have everyone where I roughly think they go. I'll just have the complete tier list here. This will be quick and casual because the qualifiers for TI are almost done, and then there might be a patch after that, so I don't want to go too much into detail. Plus, we've already got some guides out for several of these heroes. So, for example, Warlock, Nature's Prophet, and Venge I think are all top tier hard supports. You can go ahead and first phase pick them or ban them if you don't want to play them, because I think they're just that good. Nature's Prophet has the sprout damage, which allows him to trade really well in the laning stage and then teleport wherever on this giant new map, so he can just harass all over the place, join all these fights, get a big lead for his team, and participate. Item-wise, he just builds like whatever his team needs. Solar Crest has been a great item for everyone. All these heroes like buying a Solar Crest, actually. So just all around a great hero. I think he's fantastic. You can play Warlock in the old Warlock way with the heals and all that, but I think that's boring. I think maxing Fatal Bonds and getting points in Upheaval is really good right now, possibly even a Midas. I didn't mention that in my guide, but if you're having a really good game off of the Fatal Bonds, you can get Midas scale up really quickly, because I think he has everything he needs just in his base toolkit, and I do like buying the shard early, but that's at 15 minutes, so I gotta wait if I'm super rich, and maybe I'm buying a Midas in that time. I don't know, maybe. And it's worked a couple times since I've tried it, so I do like that build if you guys want to give it a go. Many games go late anyways, where Warlock excelled, and now his early laning stage is great. Vengeful Spirit has had a series of buffs over time, so she's a universal hero. She gets a lot of early trading value out of cheap stats. She has armor reduction plus damage reduction on her W. That makes her trading really good and helps her scale into the late game by just reducing the enemy's physical damage output by 30% from their right clicks every time you hit them. That's great. Her stun duration got buffed significantly, and then she has damage reduction on her swap as well. So when you use it to save people, they're just very tanky in that time. It's only 3 seconds, but sometimes that's all you need to keep your carry alive. Let them pop BKB, Satanic, whatever. They're back in the fight, good to go. So you will see these heroes quite a lot at the pro level. In pubs, Warlock has not been as favored, or sorry, in pro matches, Warlock's not been so favored, but in pub matches, you all know Warlock is great. So these 3 heroes I already have videos for if you want to check that out. Witch Doctor came out of 7.34 with one of the highest win rates in the game, tied with Sand King at nearly 60%, which is pretty insane. He has since been heavily nerfed, now only sits at a 55% win rate, which is still one of the highest in the game. So he is fantastic. The main change that he got is his ult does pure damage. So in the early game, not so noticeable, but as people pick up more armor, and especially in the late game, it is a massive buff to the damage, which I talked about in some brief recap videos of the patches in the past, so I won't go over it again here, but long story short, it is very, very good right now into the mid to late game. It is better in pub matches. Another reason you don't see him too often in pro. You're like, why is he an S tier? We are pub players. People are not so good at dealing with the bouncing casks, with keeping their distance from Maledict, from the Death Ward. You get time to farm up the Aghanims. You get this crazy high damage ult that allows you to win like one late game fight, and then you just run it down mid with your team, and then you use your ult again there, win the fight, and then you end the game. Then we've got Treant Protector, who was kind of in a decent spot, but the trees in the lane became awkward for him because they added that Lotus Pool, and so it kind of took out a chunk of trees. Plus, you used to always just be able to like hug the edges of the maps, but now with that extra space on the sides, it became easier to hunt him down. So he kind of dropped off a little bit, but he's been getting some buffs, and now his Nature's Grasp acts as trees. So if you have the shard, for example, you can walk invis in your own queue, or in the laning stage, you can use it. And in the past, it was a little dicey to leave the trees, because if you got hit, your passive broke, and now you're really slow, you can't get away. But now you can use Nature's Grasp and run through it, and you're in the trees, technically, the whole time. So even if they hit you, and you're like, oh, this looks like a bad trade, you can just run away full speed, get back into the trees, because your passive never broke. Now, some people aren't even getting the Q right away. A very common build is like W, and then QW is ideal if it's looking like a good trading lane, but sometimes it's not, so they go like WEW to like have more sustain, max E, usually at least 1 point in Q at some point, and this build it's kind of like what he used to do in the past, but it's just, it feels better again because your laning stage got improved through the Nature's Grasp. So Out of the laning stage, you just like show up to all these different fights. Either you're at the fight with Leech Seed, keeping everyone healthy to keep fighting, or like there's a fight going on somewhere else because you're like de-pushing a dead lane. You're like, here, have this max living armor, buddies. You win that fight with that extra armor and heal. I'm down here farming. So he's been doing really well for himself. If you want to give him a shot, he's pretty good. Oh, and Treant is also better with more melee heroes. It's much easier to get value out of Leech Seed when you have melee heroes on your team. It's also easier to use against the enemy when they are melee. Nature's Grasp is more annoying for melee heroes usually, who really their only answer would be to have BKB. Ranged heroes could have BKB or a Hurricane Pike if it made sense in their build, and they're further back, so it's harder to use it on them. Same with your ultimate. So in general, Treant is actually just better when there's more melee heroes in the meta because it's easier to use your abilities. For the A tier, I think these are all great supports as well, especially after these supports get banned out. And so if you want to play any of these, it's totally fine. Undying's been getting nerfed, but he's still great at what he does, which is to win the laning stage against many melee matchups. And there's a lot of popular melee offlaners right now, so when you want to give your carry a good lane, you just pick Undying, and it's still kind of the same despite the nerfs. Obviously he's a little worse at it than he used to be, but it's still good enough, so he's still up here in the A tier. In terms of melee supports, actually, let's do those real quick, because there's Treant, Undying, Clockwork, and Dawnbreaker. These are pretty much your strongest melee offlaners, or melee hard supports right now. They're just good at laning and then offer stuff throughout the game. So like Clockwork, right? Very powerful against melee matchups. And then you got the hook shot initiate, E for scouting, lots of useful things there. Dawnbreaker, that global rotation off her ult, along with several buffs like extra base armor, allowed her to be more tanky, to absorb more damage as she runs in as a melee hero. So these are kind of like your melee heroes if you want to play them. Everyone else is kind of a ranged hero because there's a lot of popular melee carries right now with the changes to BKB being able to remove disarms with the slow resistances, stuff like that. So more melee heroes have arisen as popular carries, and usually you don't want like a double melee matchup that's very abusable if you get a poor draft. So that's why there's so many ranged heroes popular right now, along with just like the numbers working out. Silencer and Jakiro aren't really different heroes since the last patch as supports. You kind of just do the same stuff and you're just still strong at it. Of course, Jakiro has that new Aghanims, and that's great, but you're not usually rushing that as a support Jakiro anyways. So really, they're just good at the laning stage and then good in these early fights. Grimstroke did get a change, so now you can manually activate your stun whenever you want, and that gives it a lot more usability. The duration also got extended, so you don't have to pop it at 3 seconds, where you had no control before. So if you're, like, say you used it on your carry, they try to run up, they get stunned, and the other enemies walk away. Then it's like, aw, sad, like, I get no value out of my stun. But now you can make a choice. You can say, you use it, you see that stun coming out, so you pop your stun, so now both people are stunned, and that means both stuns fade, and then you like resume the fight and you're still next to each other and you at least got value out of your stun. Or if your carry has a way to continue to gap close, then they get stunned, but you just keep waiting because now the duration's long enough, the stun fades, and then they like blink forward, maybe it's an anti-mage, and then you pop your stun after that. So there's a lot more ways to use his Inkswell, which made his laning stage a lot more consistent. And of course, after the laning stage, you want to participate in these fights, and that's where E is still great. It's still a stun that you have more control over, and so it's just become a lot more easy to use. Phoenix got Mischance on Sunray, which is great. Again, thinking about all these melee heroes that have started to become more popular, it means it's easier to heal your own melee carry while damaging the enemy melee carry and making them have some mischance. That also means your egg is easier to use against these melee heroes who have a harder time getting to it compared to ranged heroes who just like pop it from far away, and then you're a sad Phoenix because your egg's dead. Snapfire also got nerfed heavily, so she's not so popular anymore as a core or support, and she's one of the biggest counter picks to Phoenix. So all of this has made Phoenix much better as a support. You can actually also play it 4 if you want, but as a 5, Phoenix is pretty solid. The last hero in this category is Oracle, who I haven't seen too much in pro play. Maybe I've just missed some games, but in the pub scene, doing pretty well for himself, especially the higher up you go in MMR, because I think he is a bit of a complicated hero, plus teammates need to know how to play with him. So Archon and up, I think he's got like 54% win rate, which is good, and even down in Herald, he's above 50, which is also good. So the more you learn Oracle and the more you can explain to your teammates what you do, the more you can get out of him. And right now, with all these melee heroes, it's easier to get value out of Fortune's End, hit multiple heroes with the AoE, and with your disarm, when there's a lot of ranged carries, it's kind of hard to use it on them. Of course, you don't have to use it that way, but it's kind of nice to have that option when you think it's a good. But if it's an enemy drow way over there and you're way back here because you're a backline support, you never really get that interaction. But now with more melee carries, they kind of come up to you, to your carry, to your offlaner, whatever. It's a lot easier to disarm them in these fights, which is, of course, great value. And then, of course, you have your ultimate, which is still great when pub games, people dive way too hard, not expecting it, and you just get to save them and turn around a team fight. For the rest of the heroes, we don't have to go into exact detail for all of them just to save time, but as long as you know what you're doing, they'll be fine going in decreasing order. So like anyone from the B category, I'm perfectly happy to see on my team. Maybe you need a little bit of luck for the draft to look great for you compared to some of these heroes. It's a little easier to pull it off, but it'll be fine, right? I have no complaints if you pick any of these. C tier is somewhat the same, but I'd kind of prefer, any of these heroes. But as long as you know what you're doing, you can make it work. You'll actually see some of these heroes a bit more in the pro scene than the pub scene. So for example, Marcy 5 has been seeing some play, even more so than like some of these heroes in the higher categories. But I think it's just harder to pull off in a pub game. And I always try to balance like seeing the pro meta versus what we can do in the pub meta. That's kind of why like Io. I think Io is actually pretty decent, but just hard in the pub scene. I might even move Io lower down because of how classically difficult it is to get people to work together with an Io. But as you move down, I'd rather not see these heroes in my team, but I'm not one to complain. These, like especially like Enigma, he used to be a support in the last patch because of demonic conversion, but that got changed, so it's just not very good right now from what I've seen. And then like Spirit Breaker and Clinks, I think were so good in the last patch that you could play them as 5s and still get away with it, but now they've been nerfed, and I think they are still fine as 4s, but as a 5, like I'd rather see someone else. And that kind of applies for many of these heroes. They're just better 4s in general, or they are just kind of like nerfed. Like Hoodwink and Ogre can play 5, so has Tusk in the past, but just right now, as 5s, I don't think it's great. Tusk is probably the best out of all these. Maybe Tusk can move up as a 5. They're better than like if you want to do Shadow Fiend 5 or something. Pick one of these heroes, please. But if you're actually willing to play any of the typical hard supports, then I would typically recommend like one of these higher categories unless you're like a one-trick pony kind of player. That's all I've got for this tier list. Let me know if you think I am overestimating, underestimating someone. I try to play all the supports I think are the best, but I don't have time to play every single support here. So if you are, like a Winter Wyvern spammer and you think she should be A tier, you let me know that. I will try to give it a shot before the next patch and see if you're right, and maybe we'll get a video out. I will have the position 4 tier list out soon, so keep an eye out for that as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in another video.